Ellis, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, what is neuroplasticity and why is it important for Gen Z to understand?
So, neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize and adapt itself by forming new connections. Our brain is actually very fluid, it's flexible. Imagine like a big piece of plasticine, it's able to kind of move and adjust to situations, learn from experiences, and heal from injuries. A really good example is you may have heard people who were told after an accident that they'll never be able to walk again, but by some miracle, they are eventually able to walk again. And that is down to neuroplasticity. So, another way of thinking about it is a bit like a city map. You know how in a city's infrastructure, you've got roads, bridges, pathways, and all these kind of things that connect us to different areas of the map. It changes and adapts over time to meet the needs because you might build new things, move another. If there's a road closure, you redirect traffic, and that improves the efficiency and the flow and connectivity. And that's just like what the brain can do. If something is damaged, there will be new paths, new detours to create this idea that things keep flowing. Um, so, your brain literally reorganizes itself to be able to find new ways to do tasks or evolve to be able to get the most effectiveness out of it itself.
And in relation to Gen Z, is this predicated on environment? And could we say that Gen Z's neuroplasticity, their brain development, could be affected by technology and by social media? Is that safe to say?
I would agree. Yeah, no, it's really important for Gen Z to understand that our lifestyle certainly does have an influence on our neuroplasticity. So for example, technology, let's take social media, for example. In fact, let's be really specific. Something like TikTok. We're constantly absorbing information in really short 60 minutes, 60 seconds, sorry, 60 seconds snippets. So our brain's starting to adapt to quick information and super different information, which then could start to impact our attention span, our depth of focus, our mood, our motivation, because of the environment that it's in or that we're putting in. So you're right, it is very much adaptable to the environment for sure.
And we're talking about impact on attention span, but could we also go as far to say that if an 8 or 15-year-old is consuming TikTok, for hours a day, that it's not impacting their attention span, it's kind of creating their attention span to be 6 seconds. And those will have downstream effects on critical thinking, focus, the ability to perform in education. Is it like, what do you think about this fiasco that's unfolding as we speak?
Absolutely. There's evidence that shows that social media use in particular has been linked to traits of lack of ability to focus for longer periods of time, shorter attention spans, um, and so I would agree that actually if we're getting young people in particular during the phase of their brain development used to the constant short and also really variable. It's a bit like having too many tabs open, right? You're constantly looking at different devices and different pieces of information very quickly. It is going to adapt that person's brain or create their attention span as you rightly said. So the brain doesn't fully develop until it's about 25. So it's something that I would be particularly conscious of until that brain has fully developed.
So, speaking specifically about social media, we always
Mhm.
hear about the effects of social media, critical thinking, focus, attention span, all of those things are going out the window. But in recent years, this certain molecule in the brain, dopamine, has come into the picture. So, what is dopamine and why should we be paying attention to it?
Great question. So, dopamine is a neurotransmitter. So, it's basically a chemical messenger that signals the brain and actually other parts of the body that is really critical in how we feel pleasure, how we think, how we plan, how we focus. It's particularly important for pleasure and reward. So, it's released during pleasurable situations. So for example, you'll get dopamine when you're eating delicious food or when you're exercising or engaging in something that you really enjoy. So it contributes to that feeling of pleasure and satisfaction. And you mentioned social media and the kind of factor in with dopamine. Social media platforms are actually designed to maximize your engagement, and it does exploit that dopamine driven reward pleasure system because your likes, your shares, your notifications, there's a certain algorithm that's developed based on your usage. So it's constantly trying to get you to check your phone, to check your social media. And I'd almost compare it a bit like a slot machine because, when you refresh your social media and you get all the different content, it's literally like a slot machine where it operates on that kind of variable reward. You might find something enjoyable that you like, you might get a new comment, you might get a new notification. And so it's creating this loop of behavior, because you're constantly looking for these unpredictable rewards.
Would it be safe to say that Gen Z's dopamine system is being hacked, not just in relation to social media, but I guess we can specifically talk about social media, but it feels like if you're a young person and you've grown up with social media and technology within an arm's reach, your brain is being neuroplastically evolved around social media, and that means your dopamine system is also being evolved around it. Is that safe to say? And what do you think about that?
I mean, I think that they are playing and exploiting on the fact that it is addictive.
Mhm.
They're purposely trying to make it addictive, compelling us to check it more frequently, to use all these different sites. So it's interesting when you say hack, because I'm assuming you mean that in the sense of purposely exploited. And I think, yeah, I do believe
Mhm.
that there are certain types of media that certainly does exploit or hack our dopamine system, in order to monetize and to yeah to to reach the audience, such as Gen Z.
And speaking about Gen Z, it seems like more Gen Z than ever are complaining about mental health, even before the pandemic, which we can get to. So just before we get, into the nitty-gritty, what is mental health?
Mental health refers to our emotional and psychological and social well-being. You've got the emotional side of things where it's about managing and expressing your emotions but effectively. Um, it's about feeling kind of generally okay, that you're able to enjoy life, and that you can bounce back from stress and adversity. It's absolutely fair to feel feelings of sadness, anger, loneliness, but it's about how much that impacts you and how long it impacts you. So, bouncing back from the more negative emotions you might experience. And then the psychological well-being is about being able to use your cognitive abilities, like your understanding, your learning, having a sense of purpose, and being able to contribute, like to school, to work, those kinds of things. And then finally, I mentioned social well-being. So that's obviously your social interactions, your relationships, being able to be in healthy relationships and connected to your community is also a big part of mental health.
So, how are Gen Z's mental health being affected by social media? And does this all have to do with dopamine, or are there other factors involved?
I think there's a combination of factors. There's a lot of societal changes and shifts that have contributed to poor mental health. I do agree that social media has a part to play because there is more awareness and education, um, which can be a good thing, but then unfortunately, there's a lot of poor information or misinformation out there, which unfortunately can produce some challenges, as I'm sure you're aware. Um, so I think that, you've got that increased awareness, um, you know, in today's world compared to older generations, we can understand pretty much anything because we have the internet and we can find out what's going on in the world and look at videos and images and different news articles. Whereas our family's generations, it wasn't as easily accessible. So that increased awareness is a good thing to some extent, but it certainly impacts our mental health when we're opening our phones and seeing so much more war and videos and so much negativity that happens in the world. And you said about why there may be more cases of poor mental health for Gen Z. I think we've got to be aware that life is different today. Yes, we grew up with the internet and smartphones, which has influenced how we interact with the world. Um, but I think there are more global issues such as climate change, for example, um, economic uncertainty that they've experienced from a really young age and has a lot of awareness and constant connectivity through the internet and through awareness about all these different factors in life. So there's a lot more pressures, I think, to today's young people.
And just going out on a limb to ask this question, so I think we're talking about two things that will eventually will cause something. So we're talking about neuroplasticity around technology, but
Hmm.
also around an environment that is increasingly uncertain and very toxic. So you're talking about
Yes.
economic uncertainty, climate change, all of the wars and, you know, horrible atrocities that are taking place in the world. And so, for a
Yeah.
generation that is growing up with that, but is also hyper connected and hyper stimulated by those things,
Hmm.
I guess my question is, what is the what does the future look like for those groups of people that are growing up with these very toxic circumstances? We'll call it like that.
I mean, it's as you said earlier, there's evidence that we're experiencing more mental health than ever. If you just take young people, when I first entered into the world of psychology, this was over 10 years ago, and I took a particular interest in children and young people's mental health because I personally experienced an eating disorder. And at the time when I first qualified, I remember it being 1 in 10 people experience, sorry, 1 in 10 young people experience poor mental health. And as of today, that is now 1 in 5. And that's just in the 10 years that I've been practicing. So, we are seeing more mental illness in this particular generation and children and young people because of the things that you mentioned earlier.
So, in sole regards to mental health, what misconceptions or misunderstandings do people have about mental health that you've experienced?
I think that people need to be more aware about the environments that they're in and
Mhm.
how the influence of their relationships, their education, their workplaces, how much of an influence that has on our mental health. People need to be in environments where they can be their true, authentic selves, where they are supported for who they are. They can be open and honest about who they are and what they're feeling, and have that psychological safety that nothing bad is going to happen if they do that. And I see a lot of environments where people don't feel they have the psychological safety to be themselves, to be open and honest and authentic. So I think, yeah, people need to be kinder to each other and more open-minded when it comes to who we are, how we're feeling, how we want to express ourselves.
So I've been having a lot of conversations with people around this digital health topic. So do you have any recommendations on how to, in a healthy way, deal with technology? One of the things is don't use your phone in the first hour of waking up. Are there
Mhm.
other, is there other advice that you would have for Gen Z who are curious about still using technology, but just in a healthy manner?
Absolutely. I would be conscious about your usage in general.
Mhm.
I agree that not using your phone for an hour after you've woken up and also before bed is also really good. And that's good for your health in general. Like your sleep wake cycles are quite dependent on different types of light. And if you're using screens before bed, then that could potentially influence your sleep. So I would have that hour screen free at the end of the day as well. However, I would also be conscious as to how much screen time you are getting generally throughout the day, or social media usage you're getting throughout the day. Most smartphones nowadays do have that ability where you can find out what your screen time is. So I'd have a look at it and see what your screen time use is and what it's going towards. Because I've seen some people have hours and hours and hours of social media time. And it's not necessarily the best way maybe to spend all of your free time. And I'm not saying that we have to completely get rid of social media, although I must say I don't have the app on my phone anymore for that reason, because
Right.
I realize how addictive it is. And I think some people have more addictive personalities. I know I find it really easy to sit and scroll, and I'll just lose a lot of time as soon as I've opened the app. There's a minimum of 20 minutes gone before I can kind of snap out of it. So being conscious of your own usage, and also what are you watching?
Right.
Um, you know, it, if you've heard of the topic or the phrase doom scrolling,
Yep.
where you kind of get a little bit down that rabbit hole of looking at the negative things and searching things that might not necessarily be healthy for us, and we're kind of in this sort of toxic loop of continuing to scroll through things even though they might not be great for us. I would be conscious about what it is that you're consuming. um if you've got a lot of celebrities and a lot of influencers that are constantly trying to sell you things or post pictures of them drinking in fancy hotels and going out all the time and living this lavish lifestyle, that's probably not necessarily going to be that helpful for our mental health and well-being, because many people do have a tendency to kind of compare themselves and feel left out, and so this kind of negative emotion comes from watching some of these unrealistic people on social media. But there's some great content creators out there that are doing really fantastic, amazing things for mental health and all kinds of different careers and interests. So just have a good, healthy following of, varied and supportive community of people on your social media, and that will certainly improve your mental health.
Like curate your digital environment.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's also important to note that most of those influencers, a couple articles came out, apparently they're all like tens of thousands of dollars in debt. Like the average debt for an influencer is 10 grand. So like there are so many factors on social media And I think those get overlooked because we are addicted to it.
Mm.
How do you notice or recognize that you're addicted to something? Not just social media, but sugar, adult films, we'll say it like that, TV. How can we recognize that addiction and then seek to overcome it?
So I would I would introduce two different, what's the word, explanations here. You've got addiction and then you've got dependency, and sometimes they can feel a bit different. So somebody who's dependent on something will find it really difficult to cut down or stop the thing that they are dependent on because they sense withdrawal symptoms. Okay, so if somebody's really dependent on social media, you might find that you delete the apps off your phone, but then you re-download them straight away, or you're constantly picking up your phone every other second, even though you've deleted them because you're in these kind of habits that's really difficult to change. Um, and then you've got addiction where there's almost this compulsivity to your behavior where it's like you can't stop. And even if there are negative outcomes from the behavior, you still continue to do those things. So let's say that somebody, let's say you lose your job because you have, or you'll lose a relationship because of a particular behavior, but you still continue to do that behavior, that might be an indication of this compulsivity, this kind of meaning that you're going to continue this even though you've had these negative outcomes from the thing that you might be addicted to. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So look at the consequences of the behavior, look at the urges that you're getting, how frequently you're getting them, how much of an impact does it have on you when you try and cut down that particular behavior? That might start to answer that question.
What do you think about these? So I'm just setting up the question. So I bought these teas for
Mm.
detoxing, right? And then I did a little
Nice.
bit of research and realized that they don't do anything. So if I'm thinking of how to detoxify my mind, we always hear these words thrown around, dopamine detox. Is that a thing? Is it recommended that we just cold turkey get off social media? Like for example, if we cold turkey get off alcohol and we're, predisposed to alcoholism, that can be fatal. So is this
Yeah.
a similar thing where if we just cut off social media, are we going to experience those kinds of negative effects? Is it recommended that we just cut off social media and then work it back into our lives? And how should we deal with the dopamine detox if that is recommended to improve our mental health?
Now, I'm not an addiction expert,
Sure.
but what I understand is that the word detox is talking about getting rid of toxins.
Mhm.
And so that is particularly used in around, any kind of toxins within your body, such as alcohol, drugs, and so on. Whereas social media doesn't cause toxins within the body. So I think the word detox is misused a lot because there is a literal meaning to it. It's all about toxins in the body. And so when you hear people saying things like, detox the mind, well, that doesn't really, it's misusing the word because social media doesn't technically give you toxicity, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. Um, but I appreciate it why it's sometimes used because they're trying to paint that picture that this is unhealthy. There's a certain amount of unhealthy impacts and influence that these social media platforms might have given us or technology has given us. And so we need to reduce the toxicity and the influence it has on our lives. But I think, yeah, if you're going to be literal about the word, it's not really appropriate to use. But I still think it has its place where they're trying to encourage you to choose healthier habits and have a positive outcome for your mindset, your mental health.
No, 100%. And it's always appreciated to be more precise with language because I feel like in the vastness of the internet, even for, 3 minutes ago when I asked the question, it is, important to pay attention to the way language is used and be more precise and specific. So thank you for calling me out. How did you
I
get?
didn't mean it to call you out, but it's more a case of, yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there.
For
And I
sure.
think some people might be worried that it's like, oh my gosh, my phone is making my brain toxic. And it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
let's make sure people understand the kind of meaning behind it.
100%. Just teasing. Uh, Back to you because I think psychology and neuroscience is not going out of fashion anytime soon. I think we need more people studying the mind and the brain.
Oh, we do. Mm.
So, how did you get started in psychology and neuroscience, and would you recommend this pathway?
My story is actually a bit unusual. As you can tell, I'm from the UK, and
Hadn't
like
noticed.
as as many people, wherever you are after you finish school, you might not know what you want to do. And here in the UK, I'm really fortunate that you can get appropriate student loans to go to university. So that's what I decided to do. Now, I always had an interest in psychology, but I actually went to university and studied music as my undergraduate degree. And it was there that I did a module on music therapy. And I was able to go to different placements where I would use music as therapy in different settings. And I absolutely adored learning about the brain, the influence music had on it, different mental health concerns and neurodiverse conditions, and being able to work with people and patients that were going through difficulties and have an influence on these people. And so from that moment onwards, I just got absolutely fascinated and thought I'm totally following the wrong career path. I need to change. Now, I specialized in music therapy whilst I was at university so that I could still keep this kind of psychology and neuroscience theme in my education because I didn't want to stop and start again. And then I did postgraduate certificates and a master's degree that was in mental health and psychology. Um, I didn't have to start all the way again to the beginning of university to become a psychologist, fortunately. Um, and would I recommend this pathway? Absolutely. I mean, it's hard, don't get me wrong. Depending on what sort of field you go in, there's different challenges. But there are so many different types of psychology. I mostly work in occupational psychology and educational psychology. So occupational is all about work. Yeah, it's about psychology of work, how people tick, and how you can meet business needs when it comes to your people. And then I'm also into my educational psychology. So that's all about helping people get the most out of their education, understanding how people learn, and I'm able to screen and support people with a neurodiverse condition. So, look into whether someone might have dyslexia or ADHD and how they can potentially support themselves if they're at school or in work. Um, but there's so many different paths, you might be into. I kind of played with the idea of going down forensics one
Mm.
stage, which is all about criminology and why people might commit crimes and psychology behind that. So looking at sometimes sociopaths
Mhm.
and psych and yeah, I really enjoy a good true crime documentary. So if
Likewise.
that's your sort of vibe, then you might find it interesting to look at forensic psychology. Clinical psychologists often work in hospitals, and they're more your people that diagnose conditions and might help with medications. There's so many different types. I'm not going to go into all of them now.
For sure.
Um, and they all come with their challenges. But I would say it's a fascinating topic, and it is so rewarding. Every single day, I finish my day thinking I've had a positive influence on somebody else's life, and that's what I work towards. And I have a lot of meaning and purpose in what I do. So it's a really fun thing to know that you're working towards that.
Well, just want to say thank you for your professionalism and also your passion about these fields because it is shining through, and all of the points that we talked about are very, very important for Gen Z and the world beyond. I just wanted to ask really quickly about the psychology of learning. I feel like education right now is undergoing a bit of a transformation with ChatGPT, a much needed shocker to that very stagnant area. We'll just say it like that. What is the psychology of learning? Are there any tips you could give to students and just general people that are interested in learning in a different manner, or any tools that you could recommend?
Absolutely. I would say that you can imagine your brain being like a sports car. And, if you put the right fuel into it, you'll get more out of it. And you wouldn't expect a car to be able to run without any kind of fuel, right? Or gas, as you say
Right.
in the States. And so, lifestyle does really come into it. So you want to make sure that you're eating a good, varied diet. Um, you want to make sure that you are hydrated because your brain, there's studies that kind of vary, but I've seen studies say that your brain can be 90% water. So if you're dehydrated, if you're not drinking enough water, then that can influence it. I'd also be conscious that I've seen a lot of Gen Z drink lots of energy drinks, which have a lot of
Mhm.
caffeine and sugars in them.
Yep.
And that has an okay effect in minimal levels. In fact, smaller doses of caffeine are fine. Um, but I think it's 400 milligrams of caffeine, which is an adult daily recommended intake of caffeine. And some of those drinks, those energy drinks, just absolutely go over that. And then if you're drinking that multiple times a day, or I've seen some people just like only drink caffeinated drinks, your brain is just not going to work as effectively. So, you know, think about what you're putting into your body and your brain, and you will get more out of it, just like you would get more out of a sports car if you made sure that, you had the maintenance and that you gave it the right gas and all that kind of thing. Um, And then also sleep. Sleep is one of the most important things. If you want to learn something, then you want to make sure that your memory is working effectively, right? Um, One of the biggest influences of people's memory is sleep. So if you're not getting enough sleep, and you're not getting enough deep sleep and REM sleep or REM sleep, then that can have an influence. And funnily enough, one of the things that disrupts our sleep is technology and screen time. So
Because of blue light, right?
being aware of that. Blue lights in general, stimulation as
Right.
well, how it stimulates your brain and your dopamine and things like that before you go to sleep, unfortunately, isn't the most relaxing thing for a good night's sleep.
Mhm.
Um, the light from it is blue light, but it's also the light in general from your screens influences another chemical called melatonin, which is important
Mhm.
for you to fall asleep and then wake up. So that's important too.
The Andrew Huberman, get light within the
Yeah.
first 30 to 60 minutes of the day. Don't use your phone at night. Then you go to Matt Walker, Why We Sleep, all of that. Oh, Matt Walker is British.
Yes. Great book as well, the Why We
Fantastic.
Sleep.
I love that
Yeah.
book. And I love his podcast too, the Why We Sleep podcast, also very
Yeah.
accessible. Um,
Shout
so
out.
so regarding technology and neuroscience and psychology, can technology enhance or advance the study of psychology and neuroscience? And specifically, is AI a benefit or a detriment to your field?
It's definitely a positive. It's amazing what we're able to do now in terms of brain scanning and using technology to understand how our brains work. I still think we're so early on, though. I mean, psychology has only really been a practice for about 100, 120 years, and we've not had technology for all of that time. So we've still got so much that we can explore and uncover. Um, but we have learned so much because of the advancement of technology, like I said, with brain scans, and being able to reach out to more and more people. Ever since COVID, it's a bit bittersweet where, it really impacted people's mental health. But now that we've been forced to work more remotely and adapt to more online work, I've been able to reach more people. And there's many counselors and psychologists that work online, which means that they have taken their prices down. So it's made it more affordable for people to access psychologists and therapists, which is amazing. So there are some real great positives to psychology for sure. And your question about AI, that's an interesting one because it's still really new, right? So
Right.
I'm not 100% how that's going to influence everything at the moment.
Hmm.
But I certainly appreciate how AI makes things quicker for
Hmm.
us. Um, and it certainly helps. Um, I recommend it to people with a neurodiverse condition. So, for example, dyslexia,
Hmm.
you can literally tell one of the AI functions like ChatGPT to write an email for you, and you just put in what you want it to, and it will give you a really brilliant, cohesive email with with the grammatical and spelling adjustments. And that's been something that has really benefited people with certain conditions. So, there's definite benefit AI. And I know that AI companies are being particularly mindful of people being able to access harmful information from there. So, if you put in questions about your mental health, you tend to find that they do respond with saying things like, speak out to a counselor and support. We're not able to give you advice, X, Y, Z, which is brilliant. And I think there's a lot of information that is quite helpful there. But I would worry AI is not a replacement for therapy, for support. Um, and we need to make sure that that information continues to be accurate as possible. So those are a few concerns that I have.
So many questions that I have for you, and they don't
Mhm.
form a cohesive narrative, but I'll just hit on them one by one. So, first off, are you worried about the problems with large language models, which is the underpinnings of ChatGPT, in the sense of bias, hallucination, misinformation, specifically in scientific studies? Are you using artificial intelligence in that way? Can you talk about, yeah,
No, because it is often incorrect.
right.
If you use it and say, write me an article on XYZ, um, and I've done it before, I've asked it a few questions and it's come up with a statistic.
Mhm.
And the statistic is wildly off because it lacks the ability to understand limitations of pieces of research, and sometimes it will do its own calculations where it's
Yeah.
like it's read five different articles, and let's say you have the statistic of 1 in 5 young people experience poor mental health, but it's also read that 1 in 10. So it kind of averages it sometimes, I've noticed, and
Yeah.
it just creates its own kind of response.
Mhm.
So yeah, a lot of the statistics are not accurate. But I really like it to help me calculate my own so that, if I have the data and I want to ask it a quick question, then that's quite helpful to respond. But yeah, it can be wildly inaccurate. You do need to double check it.
100%. What would, and just as a thought experiment, what would an artificial intelligence system that is able to understand research, is able to understand misinformation, is not prone to bias or hallucination, what would that do for the field of psychology and neuroscience? How would being able to trust a digital entity, so to speak, with all of this, all of these data and numbers and studies, what would that do for the advancement and enhancement of psychology and neuroscience? Just as a thought experiment.
I mean, if you could guarantee accuracy, then of course there's going to be less human error, which is totally acceptable and expected to certain degrees. That's why we have, whenever you submit an article or a journal piece of research, it's peer reviewed. So you have minimum of two people that will read your article and critique it and question it and, make sure that everything is accurate, which, I mean, if AI could do that for you, then I guess it would remove the need for this kind of peer review where actually everything would be confirmed as accurate, which would save us a lot of time
Mhm.
and potentially remove errors. And there is certainly biases in certain pieces of research as well. Um, and it'd be interesting if you could guarantee that there was no unconscious bias
Mhm.
in certain pieces of research as well. But I would worry that it takes away the human nature of everything. It might become almost a bit too robotic, um, and potentially lose people's jobs and livelihoods if we're so reliant on technology that we don't need the people as much. Then what's to happen to a lot of people's jobs and livelihoods?
Regarding occupational psychology, because now you've gotten me interested in this kind of shift to UBI when automation does inevitably disrupt jobs, are you thinking of how people's psychology is going to change? Just as an example, people link their identity with their job title, job position. What are the potential effects on people's mental health and etc. when they're on UBI and unable to get any type of, fulfilling occupation?
I mean, I can imagine you could answer that question because, as you say, not having that fulfillment and that social interaction is really important. You were asking me earlier about neuroscience and chemicals, and we are very gregarious people. Humans are gregarious, they're social. Even though some people might say that they're not as social, we need social interaction to a degree. And so if you start to remove that from the workplaces, then we start to influence particular chemicals such as oxytocin. Just getting eye contact from someone increases people's oxytocin. And that is that feel good, happy, and loving chemical that people experience. It is that sort of social connection and supportiveness that you get. And there's even studies that showed that when we all went into our lockdowns and started to work more online, that there was a huge increase of people experiencing stress and low mood, and people linking that to the fact that they're working online. And, I can see you right now, but I'm not going to be getting as much of my oxytocin and even dopamine and that reward and all of those good chemicals because I'm not getting eye contact. Yeah, we're not looking face to face with that eye contact, which has an influence on those chemicals. So you will certainly see a shift in people's mental health, in their well-being. And then I would suggest that that will have an influence from business outcome because, okay, you might have an increased efficiency in certain areas because you've minimized human error and bias and you've made everything quicker. Um, but then if people aren't feeling happy and healthy at work, that reduces their likelihood to be motivated, to be productive, to stay within that workplace. You might lose talent because they're leaving to
Mhm.
go to other places where they're not replaced by UBI
Right.
positions. Um, and then there's often increase of sickness absence as well.
Hmm. It will be interesting to see if this spike in oxytocin with eye contact also transfers over to the metaverse. If you're able to wear XR goggles and instead of having so much friction, there's a laptop here in front of us, and that's the only way we're connected. If we can be connected in cyberspace somehow, if that would have some development or some enhancement on our psychology, it would be interesting. Alice, I just want
Mm.
to say thank you for this episode. I just have one more question for you. You are an absolute well of knowledge. What advice do you have for Gen Z?
My advice would be to be more conscious of how you're utilizing technology and the impact that that is having on you. We've talked about different things in this podcast that you might find useful to try and implement. Um, but if it is having an impact in your life, or if you are experiencing poor mental health, then do not hesitate to get support and try to be more proactive than just reactive. So don't wait to like get worse or be in crisis or until your time of technology use is to a point that it's taking up a huge amount of time. Try to be more proactive, get things started now. um Another metaphor I often use in terms of well-being is it's a bit like going to the gym. You can't expect to go through a difficult time and just be okay. And it's just the same if you go to lift up a really heavy weight. You have to train and be consistent to be able to increase your weights at the gym. Otherwise, you might be in a lot of pain the next day, right? Or at least that's how I feel when I overdo it at the gym.
Sure,
So,
sure.
so same with your mental well-being. You need to practice. You need to go and lift those weights, and you need to go to the gym, and you need to go and look after yourself because when times are tough and things get difficult, you can't expect yourself to be resilient without having worked on yourself and your own well-being. So be reactive. But of course, please do get the help if you feel you need it.
Fantastic. Where can we find you on social media if you do have it, or on the internet in
So I
general?
do have it. I
Okay,
do have it. I just don't have the apps on my phone.
sure.
At least not all year round. Like I will download them again every so often. But I typically don't have them all year round. So my business is called Mindset Business Psychology Services, or BPS. So all my handles are at Mindset BPS. So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Or it's not called Twitter now, is it? X.
X, yeah.
And I'm a big LinkedIn user. So
Nice,
if you want
nice.
to connect with me on a more personal level, then come over and find me on LinkedIn.
Absolutely fantastic. Ellis, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been good fun.